Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much again for giving up a little bit of your precious time this afternoon to come along and learn a little bit about how you can run a great workshop. It's a topic that I don't know. I think a lot of people are interested in, and I think that a lot of people want to be able to run a better learning experience. And I guess for me, one of the things I want you to just be clear about that language before we kick off today is that we are talking about a learning experience here, not how to create better entertainment for people. So if for some reason you've come along today because you're looking to find out how to put on a better show or to be able to get some better feedback, I can save you the trouble now that to get better feedback, just make sure that the room temperature doesn't fluctuate and that there's good food in the breaks. They're the two first indicators around whether you'll get nice feedback for your entertainment or not. But if you're here today because you'd like something to happen after the learning experience of a workshop that's actually meaningful, that actually means that your work is in some way having a genuine impact either in your own workplace or in the places where you are delivering your work, then stick around. I reckon you're in for something useful today. So again, thank you so much for coming along. I just want to, start by highlighting for me the premise under which I arrived today, and the premise under which I underpin 3 A's that sit very fundamentally under the Real Learners approach. And I'm personally quite excited to talk about this stuff today because this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where we step out of this idea of learning but needing to be accessible, accessible and actionable, and we actually start to really make it happen. So I just want you to know that first of all, it's really important that we make that decision that the workshops that we're going to run are learning experiences, not entertainment. And what that means is that participant activity, participant commitment needs to be incredibly high. And to achieve that, what we're going to need to do is to make our experience learner-centered. And we need to actually just stop for a second and go, okay, how learner-centered even is the environment that we run our workshops in these days? I probably see that there are 2 main modes that workshops are run in, 2 main contexts. One is where people sit in rows. And what that's telling me is that there's 2 factors at play here. Number one, it's telling me that this is about power. So the learning leader is going to assume a powerful position at the front of the room, and they're going to deliver their wonderful wisdom or facts or things that you didn't know previously. And apparently you're going to leave with that toolkit far better bolstered and to be able to head out there and do some really, really awesome stuff. The truth is, though, that we have no idea whether you will or not. We have no idea whether you're there in body but not in mind and spirit. We don't ask you to do anything with that learning, and the context dictates that will be so. So when we set our workshops up with people sitting in rows, we can be very sure that we will have absolutely no idea whether they got what we said or not. To make the environment learner-centered, we need to step to what I would call is the second context, which is we'll sometimes have tables, and we'll have people in groups of about, somewhere between 8 to 10, which is more than twice the optimum number for people working together optimally. The best number's 4, and actually our October webinar is going to be about how to get great group work and collaborative learning starting to happen. So I do believe for a workshop, getting people in tables is better, but it still isn't taking it far enough that we're manipulating that context to get what we really want out of it. And like I mentioned, that's the whole idea of being really learner-centered. Learner-centered means that they're engaged. Now, look, engaged is one of those buzzwords that are out there at the moment that are all about, you've got to have engaged, you've got to have an engaged workforce, you've got to have engaged employees, you've got to have engaged leaders. And I'm not really sure that we're stopping and thinking about what engagement really is. Engagement's 4 things for me. It's people that are either listening, speaking, thinking, or doing. And if they're not doing any of those, for instance, if they're doing the opposite of engagement, I think the greatest killer of engagement in any learning environment is waiting. It's wait time. There's nothing like sitting still and staring into space, which we can all do, that stops you from listening, speaking, thinking, or doing. So what we need to do is to choose a context that means that people can step into accessing the information. That's why our first A here is accessible. We've got to find a way to manipulate the context to make sure that people can genuinely access it when they're in the learning environment. Secondly is we need to assess, and a lot of people think that assessment is something that we do after the learning event, after the workshop, and I want to dispel that little myth today. I want to bust that one open. And the third one is that for it to be a genuine learning experience, it has to be actionable. People have to leave the learning experience having made a commitment that they will do something different. So for me today, it's actually really important to me that you step into that space too, that you step up. So I want to just remind you before we get into content today, that there's ways for you to step up and get involved in our webinar today. There's a hand up function. So if you're sitting at your laptop or your desktop, or using the standard GoToWebinar control panel, you'll be able to find a little hand palm there. That means that you can put your hand up and get involved in what we're doing today. So if you click that button, I'm going to periodically have a bit of a look to see if there's anyone with their hand up. It's good that it's not a regular classroom and your arms and your shoulders don't completely give way. But I'll occasionally have a look and see if you've got your hand up. And if you think you can contribute something, I'll unmute you and give you the chance to ask your question in person, just like you would in a regular classroom, which is pretty cool. And the second thing you can do to participate today is to have a look in the question box. And so if you do choose to have a look in the question, go to that question box today and put a question in. There's a couple of types of questions you might put in there. One is that it might be about what we're discussing in the webinar, in which case I'm going to keep a close eye on that as well. And if you see my screen change, or if you see the mouse move, it's just because I'm going to have a bit of a look at what's in the question box. And also, if you're having any tech issues today, if you're having, we've got quite a lot of new people who I notice have registered today who haven't come into my world before. So if that's you and you're having a bit of trouble accessing, or you can't hear me properly, or something's not working for you, then pop it in there, because this is a two-person show, this webinar. While I'm doing the delivery part of it, behind the scenes we have our wonderful business manager, Chris Ennebrad, and she's a gun on being able to assist with all the tech issues, and I can tell you now I'm not. So if you've got a question about how to participate or access the webinar at all, whack it in there. But the truth is, if I'm going to run an hour today on how to build a fantastic webinar, how to build a fantastic learning experience like a workshop, it's probably better if you guys do step up and participate, because that way I'm practicing what I preach, and we're making it a little more student-centered, a little more learner-centered than we are making it teacher or leader-centered. So let's get cracking. I said a couple of things in the tagline for this webinar, where I said that what we were looking to do was to build workshops that allow us to move on from PowerPoint and dad jokes. What I want to say about that is that I'm kind of hypocritical, aren't I? Because I say we're moving on from PowerPoint, but here I am using PowerPoint to deliver my webinar today. What I want to say to you is that most people make a mistake with PowerPoint of using it as the vehicle for content delivery. And I think even when you look at, you can make your PowerPoint slides look fantastic, and you can go into places. I've taken this little snapshot here from a site called Creative Market, where you can get in there and there's just stacks and stacks of PowerPoint templates that you can download to be able to make your content really pop, really come to life, and that's a good thing, Having strong and worthwhile visuals is a handy thing to do. I'd suggest it's the last thing you do. So I think that if you can get the other components of a great workshop in place, that your imagery will matter less. But if you're a perfectionist and you like to get that last 2% of effect done, then head into something like Creative Market, download a decent looking template, and get someone else to go and design your PowerPoint presentation on a site like Freelancer or Fiverr, and you'll look fantastic, which is really good. But the fundamental mistake, like I said, that people make is that they think that PowerPoint's a vehicle for getting their content across, and it's not. In fact, the more content that we put up there, the less people are likely to engage. And again, remembering that engagement's about listening, thinking, speaking, or doing. Once that slide comes up with a whole heap of text on there and multiple different options and a few different infographics, and half of them are spinning around because we've got very funky about our animations, people completely disengage. So what's the point of PowerPoint? PowerPoint's a fantastic lesson plan. So what I know about building a PowerPoint slide is it allows me to sequence and structure the learning the learning experience such that I actually am timely in the way that I deliver it. I don't run out of time when I use PowerPoint as the point. When I use PowerPoint as my lesson plan. When I use it as a vehicle for delivery of content, I was at a conference last week, and I went to one of the breakout sessions, and this was a 50-minute breakout session, and the presenter for this breakout session was actually quite good at the front of the room. I really liked the way that she operated, and she tried to communicate through story. She tried to make sure that there wasn't too much content in her slides, which I thought was really clever. The problem was that she had 64 slides in her presentation, and that meant that she ran over time as she got to the end. And I think you can all imagine too what happens when a presenter does go over time. What happens is that everybody sits there looking at their watch, tapping their watch, looking at each other, looking at each other, sort of shrugging their shoulders and mouthing that little WTF to each other about why is this going so long. So what had happened was that she made the mistake of thinking that delivering content was the purpose of her PowerPoint, and so therefore she crammed as much in as she could because more content must be better. It's not. It creates a wonderful sequence for your lesson, and if you can use that as a great way of being able to stay on track to ensure that you finish and that you present and that you unpack key points in a really timely way, then PowerPoint can really serve you. And that's when it becomes not the point of your whole presentation or your workshop. It's just one of the tools that you're using to make sure that your delivery is more effective. And look, the second thing that I said was that, that we're going to move beyond dad jokes. And that also is highly hypocritical of me. I've got two teenagers in my house who are subjected constantly to horrible dad jokes. My favourite is inspired by Super Mario that you can see on the screen there. And that is that, I don't know if anybody even's got the question box open at the moment, but if you want to answer, I'll give you a quick moment. My favourite dad joke is, what are Super Mario's overalls made of? So I'll give you a moment to think about that before I give you the answer. So I actually love a good dad joke, but what I want you to do is to just be a little bit careful about the way that you bring humour in, because it can be very forced. If I hear one more presentation with a joke about a Kardashian or about Justin Bieber, I might just, my eyes might roll back that far enough back in my head that they don't come back again. And to be honest, really, have a look at this photo of Kim Kardashian with her husband Kanye. You can't make them more funnier than they already are. So while I love a bit of humour in my presentations, I think that humour is best used within genuine stories that help to illustrate your point. I think that if you can, any presentation any workshop is more enjoyable if there's some positive affect, and I want to talk more to that shortly. But the truth is, when it's forced, when it's tacked on because we feel like we have to throw humour in, then I think that's when we do our own credibility a disservice. So humour at all costs, but Australians love humour within a good yarn, within a good story, and I think we need to keep that in mind rather than trying to be topically funny the way that a comedian hosting a late night show in the US might. I noticed that nobody's been able to answer my question there about, what are Super Mario's overalls made from? They're made from denim. So you're now equally in the pain that my children are in. Congratulations. So again, I guess I've said move on from PowerPoints and dad jokes, but look, the truth is a little bit of both is absolutely fine. Bring them in for the right purpose, and you can actually have them serve rather than detract from the learning experience that you're trying to get in place. A really great expression that I learned doing some work earlier this year with the Australian Navy was to begin with the end in mind. When they're planning, they're always trying to think a little bit about where are we going to end up here, and making sure that the journey itself of being in a workshop is geared around getting to the correct end. One of my favourite thinking frames that I often use I use it as what's called an exit pass, which means that sometimes I'll talk to this a little bit later as well. I reject the idea of applause as a great way to finish a workshop. And what I say is that if you want to get out of the room, then what you need to do is to tell the person next to you what did you K, T, F, or D? And I think these are good ways to frame up the way that people can engage. I often tell them at the start of the workshop, so I begin with the end in mind. I tell them that I want you to come up with one of these 4 letters for me by the end of the workshop. And then at the end, I say, if you want to leave the room, you've got to turn to the person next to you and declare which one it was for you. K stands for the word know, okay, so connected to knowledge. So this is just, what did you learn? What's the fact? What's the piece of content that you now know that you didn't know before? And facts and content are very binary in that they're either believed or not. So what we need to do is, they're very hard and fast. They're, a piece of knowledge, something that we believe is a thought we hold to be very true. And so what we need to do is say, okay, at the end of any great learning experience, it'd be great if we know something new. T is something that you think. So it can be a little less formed than a piece of knowledge. It might be, you know what, that line you said about this today, it's really made me think this about the work that my team are doing on this. I'm not quite sure how to apply all of that yet, but I'm thinking, I'll tell you now, this has really gotten under my skin. And I think when you're looking to craft a great workshop, we should be looking to leave with your people thinking. We should be getting under their skin. And I want to talk a bit more about how you can get under people's skin as we move forward today as well. F is something that you feel, and it can be controversial. It can be dangerous to make it clear for people that the truth is, even as the leader of learning in a workshop, we have no control over what people feel. We have absolutely no idea. They could feel bored. They could feel excited. They could feel anywhere on the range between those two things. Their feelings can be highly dictated by what was going on in their lives before they even entered the room, and they can be affected, hugely by even just a text message or an email that they got while they were in the learning experience. So our ability to impost across people's feelings is very, very low. Yet we can do the work that's required to make sure that the feelings serve the learning environment wherever we possibly can. And I'll tell you shortly about what I aim for when I'm running a workshop in terms of feelings. But let's acknowledge them. Let's have people have the chance to tell each other what those feelings are. And the D is to decide. And a friend of mine who presented this frame to me, called Matt Church, says that the D, the etymology behind the word decide, is the same as some pretty horrible words like homicide and genocide and suicide. And the side part of it is where we're talking about killing off. And when we decide, what we do is we kill off choice, which I think is a really powerful thing for people to do when they're in a workshop, is to ask people, what have you decided? What's the line in the sand that you have crossed? That you can look back on the work that you were doing previously and say, you know what, without shame, I can look back on that and say that, I was doing the best that I possibly could. But I have made a decision that is no longer going to be the case. And I've decided on this side of the line in the sand that something very, very different is going to occur. So I'm often asking people not to clap me at the end of a session, but to actually turn to the person next to you and make a declaration about what is it that you K, T, F, or D. And I find that a better frame to begin and end a workshop with. Affect, though, those feelings, they are your success criteria. So the way that you are able to make people feel as a result of the way that you craft and manipulate and sculpt the learning environment of a workshop is incredibly important. So I want to say to you that, again, I don't think you should be seeking great feedback forms from people. Most people, if you give them a 0 to 10 range, will give you, a 6, 7, or an 8 to the extent of around 95% of them. So it doesn't really tell you anything. But what I would ask is, about 3/4 of the way through your workshop, if you have a look at their faces, you'll have a fair idea of how engaged they have been. So we can get this yawny kind of look across people, and you can tell that internally they're present in body, but their mind has gone towards what they're going to cook tonight, or who they think Maddie will choose on The Bachelor, or whatever it is that you think whatever it is in their lives that they have actually prioritised above the quality of your learning workshop at that time. And so I just want to, there's just a little word of warning here for me about saying, okay, if these people here that you can see on the screen are bored, then what we must do is to seek for the opposite, which is that people are happy and excited. And this is my point about applause, is that people tend to applaud, and they smile and turn to the person next to him just to affirm that, yes, I'm clapping because you're just as happy as me. But it doesn't mean that they have actually got something meaningful out of the workshop. My belief is that people don't necessarily need to look like this at the end of a workshop. So I mentioned before the feelings or the affects that I strive for when I'm running a workshop. The first is that I say that I like to inspire, and look, you can probably tell in my voice, as opposed to others who might be in public speaking, that I'm perhaps not your typical inspirational or motivational speaker. I'm not someone who's going to get up and rah-rah and jump around the stage like crazy. I'm about 6'4", and if I do the Tom Cruise and jump on couches and things like that, I'm going to break them. So I'm pretty straight between the eyes. I like a good gag. I like a good story, but I'm not running around the stage with a crazy amount of energy. But I do believe that a great learning experience is inspirational. And I do believe that when you are looking to run your work, you would like to be inspirational as well. So I'm often asking people who likes to be inspired, and Australians sort of half put their hand up. We're different to American crowds. When American people, I have asked an American audience once, who likes to be inspired, and their hands are thrust into the air and they say, yes, I would really like to be inspired, and like that. Whereas Australians sort of put a hand up just about shoulder height, going, yeah, suppose. And so we kind of know, but we've come to link inspiration with, nutters walking on hot coals and stuff like that. And that's not what it's really all about. Australians are inspired by story. And if you can bring wonderful story, I actually think this is a component that we've picked up from our Indigenous people in Australia, is that if you can make a key point, but then unpack it through story, then what we do is we start to contextualize it, and we find that an incredibly inspiring thing to do, because we can see ourselves doing it once we hear about somebody else who has done a similar thing. So the look that I'm going for is more like this. So this is people who are not necessarily happy and clapping, but they're really in a little bit of problem solving. They're in a little bit of what Dr. Simon Breakspear would refer to as productive struggle. And I think when people do start to solve genuine real world problems in your workshops, and they put this curious or this intense look on their face, I think that's better than happiness, to be really honest, as a success criteria for our workshops. So I think it's very, very important that when it comes to the work that we're looking to do in a workshop, that while we want to have positive affect, because positive affect as opposed to negative affect wraps or insulates the learning and makes sure that it's longer. You can engage people for greater periods of time and in a much more deep and meaningful kind of way. The opposite of boredom isn't necessarily happiness or excitement. The opposite of that is absolute rapture in what it is that we want them to actually work on. So I want you to keep that in mind about the way you want people to feel in your workshops. The next thing I want you to do is to chunk like crazy. Something about the way that we started to view learning, and this is something that happened to you many, many, many years ago. When you first started to land in formal learning environments, you started to pick up the idea that a lesson needed to be about an hour. For most of us, when we first arrived in school, and particularly high school, your periods that you went to ran for about an hour or 50 minutes or so. And usually it was built on what I would call the 1545 methodology, which is that the instructor or the leader of learning would speak at the front of the room, perhaps demonstrate, if you were really lucky enough to get someone who would help you with some visual representation of what they wanted you to do. Would speak, and for about 15 minutes or so, and they would then set you work to do for 45 minutes. If you dared to be distracted in that 15 minutes, though, it's gone. That key point is out the window. And when you're asked to then go and staying 45 minutes of attention using a new piece of knowledge or a new skill or a piece of instruction, you've got no chance because you missed it and it's gone. Somehow when we got to the learning environment, we decided that as learning leaders, if we're going to run the workshop, we can't be seen as lazy. So we sort of flipped that 15-45 methodology into a 45-15 methodology, where we would kind of speak for really long periods of time, hoping that people caught it. And then we might actually just default in the end to, like, okay, so what I want you to do is just have a chat at your table about, what I talked about over the last, 40 minutes or so. And so we give them a little bit of activity to do. I actually think that the idea that there's only going to be one period of time for instruction and one period of time for collaboration in a workshop is patently flawed. In fact, one of the targets that I have when I'm running a workshop is to try and get myself into 5-2 land, which means I'm looking to try and move, instead of having 15-45 or 45-15, what I'm looking to do is to go 5-2, 5-2, 5-2, 5-2. And I move people in and out of instruction and activity with incredibly rapid fire regularity. What it tells people is a couple of things. First of all is that we've moved on from an old methodology. So once they actually pick up that we're now, this isn't the average workshop, that they go, okay, so they sort of tend to get a little bit excited about that, which is really cool because, you can leverage that excitement for activity and engagement. And so they just get excited about the fact that we're no longer operating on a past model of education, but that we're now operating in a brand new or a futuristic kind of way of working. The second thing that the 5-2-5-2-5-2 methodology does is it provides a scaffold for people around their learning, which means that if you didn't quite get what the key point that someone was making, you don't then miss the next point wondering what that first point was all about or what's going on now. You actually are compelled into action and you get modeled, you get the activity or the key point modeled by the people around you before you move on. So it provides a success scaffold, which means that even if you miss a little bit, the high likelihood is that when you have to do something with it, you go, oh, okay, that's what that was all about. Now I get it. And then bang, you're back into the next piece of instruction that you can build on as you keep going. And I think that what that's done for me, I think if you go back to the 15-45 methodology where somebody speaks for 15 minutes straight, if you're like me, it's usually about the 3 or 4 minute mark that my attention starts to wander. But if I can get to 3 or 4, so that means that after about 15-20% of the time, my engagement is slipping away. Yet if I'm going to wander after 3 or 4 minutes and the presenter is only speaking for 5, at the most, and I tend to, like I said, that when I talk about 5-2, I'm talking about 5 minutes of activity for them, 2 minutes of instruction for the learning leader. If I do happen to do need to speak for 5 minutes, and somebody is going to wander after 3 or 4 minutes, well, the good part is they got 60 to 80% of it, which is a much bigger improvement than if I was going to speak for a long period of time. So what it does in terms of engagement, in terms of listening, speaking, thinking, or doing, is it makes sure that people don't ever slip too far away. Because I'm going to be really honest with you about engagement, is that once people are gone, you've got to be like rock star level instructor to get them back. So it's a much easier job to keep people engaged than it is to re-engage them once they lose that. So chunking is a hugely important thing to be able to do. I want to give you a couple of tips, a couple of tricks today that you can use that can really help you to be able to assess on the run. Now, assessments, like I said, that's moving on to my second A here about the learning always must be accessible. You've got to be able to prove that what you did made a difference in some way. This is an app called Plickers that I really have just started using myself, and I'm a bit of a fan, to be really honest. The way that it works is you download the app on your phone, and there's a set of QR codes that you can just print out for your workshop participants. Now, if you know their names, that's even better ahead of time, because you can create a little class for yourself in there, in your Plickers account, And you just give everybody a little QR code on their table that you can print out really easily and that they provide for you. There are obviously, when you've got a QR code, it's a square, so there's 4 sides to it. So what you do with the QR code is you make it, okay, if it's facing upwards, so that might be side A. You know, if you have side A at the top, then that's a certain response that people are providing. If they turn it one way, they might have side B at the top. Turn again and it's side C, turn again and it's side D. Now, using your phone, if you get everyone to actually answer a question with to one of those 4 options, you can use your phone to really quickly, I'm talking just a few seconds, you can scan the room and you can get an idea immediately of what people are thinking about a piece of content that you've just presented. This lends itself so cleverly to this whole 5-2-5-2-5-2 methodology. So there are many different types of questions that you can answer, and this commits to not only summative assessment. So summative assessment is a sort of assessment that you do at the end of a workshop, usually in the form of feedback form. Like I said, I'm no fan anyway. But also it commits you to formative assessment, which is the assessment that you do on the run, the assessment that you do in the middle of the learning experience. To give you an idea, I guess, just even metaphorically, between formative and summative assessment, formative assessment is the waiter coming and asking you in the middle of the meal, is everything okay, ma'am? But summative assessment is the review that you put on Zomato or on TripAdvisor when you get home. It's happened afterwards. You provide that feedback and that assessment or that evaluation of your experience. Formative assessment is incredibly powerful in terms of feedback for people so that they can move forward. And don't think that this is just a simple multiple choice question that's all about knowledge. You can ask a direct knowledge question. So you can ask, okay, given in mind what I've done here, can you tell me what is the capital of Australia? And you can put your four options on the board and ask people to put ask people to turn their QR code to provide the right answer. It's pretty low level learning. But the one thing I like about Plickers is that you can adapt the question to drag people up into higher levels of learning, which I think is pretty cool. So you could ask an opinion-based question. So you could be asking them, you know, how would you use this information to do this? And you know, give them 4 options, and you can find out which ones of them are able to successfully apply that information to do something else successfully. You can ask a design level question. So, you know, you could be delivering a first aid workshop, and you might be teaching them about, you know, how you deliver CPR, and this is the basics of how you deliver CPR. What you'd like to ask then is, given that somebody who's 70 years old collapses outside the supermarket on a freezing cold day when it's pouring with rain, what do you think would be the first steps you would take? So you're asking them to design, given a scenario that they could not have imagined while they were actually just learning about CPR. And you can also, one of the things I love about Plickers too, is that you can measure and assess understanding as well, which I think's, you know, outrageously cool. So what you can do is, for instance, have the 4 questions might just be, okay, so we've covered a key piece of content there. I want you to have a chat to the person next to you and think about what you believe your own self-assessment is of your understanding at the moment. And then once you've decided on that, I want you to hold up your QR code for me, whereas the side A pointing up might mean I have absolutely no idea what this is all about. Side B might be I'm getting there. Side C might be yes, I've got it. And side D might be yes, I'm already using this now. So you can actually get a really clear understanding across your group. So you get cohort feedback immediately on what level of understanding people have in the learning environment, but you also get individual level feedback because you can flick straight into your account and see that, it was Amy Silver all along, who had absolutely no idea what I was talking about, and Daryl Chan and David Gracia, and so I'm going to have to get along and have a conversation with them so that I can make sure that they start to get some traction with their learning as well. The good part is that I've got Mavis and Michelle and Suzanne who have got this absolutely down pat. They're already using it. And you know what? Actually, probably what I should do is go and get Mavis to talk to Amy, because that way I can make sure that she's got that level of understanding. And Mavis, you know, to be really honest, will enhance her learning by being able to explain it to somebody else. So once you understand that assessment doesn't need to be the old defaults of just hand out a feedback form at the end, or just go and observe whether someone does something that changes the world with what they've learned, that we can actually find different ways to do things. And finding different ways to do things means letting go sometimes of our own control. And that means to make the learning genuinely student-centered. One of the things that I want you to think about is, can I bring in student choice? So when we are talking about being genuinely student-centered, I use the teacher speak of differentiate, which means understand that your people who are landing in the learning environment, they're not robots. You know, they come with varying levels of skill, varying past experiences, varying levels of prior knowledge about the topic that you're going to cover. And so it's kind of, when we take that into account, it makes sense that just giving them one task to do, one bit of activity to do in a learning environment that's apparently a one-size-fits-all kind of thing is not going to work for everybody. So when I talk about, in teacher speak, differentiation, the truth is what I'm talking about is providing options. So here's what I want to do. I want to run a little activity with you that I think will help you to be able to get clear on what I'm talking about. So this is a lesson that I actually have run as a teacher. And I've pitched this lesson at about year 8 or 9 at school. I'm hoping that you can remember heading back into year 8 or 9. For me, I was probably trying to look like Michael Hutchence, and most of the girls were trying to look like Cyndi Lauper, which gives you an idea of my age. But it was a very hilarious looking time. So if I'm back in year 8 or 9, I'm going to play you a song that I think has a decent narrative. While I'm playing that song for you, I'm going to present 6 different options where you can demonstrate your understanding of that narrative, that story within the song. Okay, now some songs don't have particularly good stories, okay, but this one I reckon really does. Now, as I play this song, let's hope that that plays for you. Oh, might not be at the moment. Oops, I'm just going to go back a sec. Thank you for putting up with my tech skills here. It's not going to play for me. Oh, I'm very shattered, because the cool part about this song is that give it one more try. There it goes. I reckon this is the one song that has the most wonderful narrative within it to try and interpret. Now have a little bit of a think here. If I was to present these kind of options to you, option 1 is that I want you to summarise the story and to identify the most important parts of it in your own words. Option 2 is I want you to talk about what you think the main idea or what the moral is behind this story. Option 3 is that I want you to retell it. I want you to write it again, but in your own words and with your own ideas. I want you to talk to the main character of the story. I want you to think about, what do you think that person was all about? What do you think? What do you think made between the two? And the third one is I want you to actually storyboard almost for me the sequence of events within that story. So if that's the case, oops, I'll just go back again. Here's what I want you to do. Just while that's playing, I'll put that back on again. Here's what I want you to do. This PowerPoint's fighting me today. In the question box, it's sitting there. If summarise the story is the one that you would choose, given these options, put number 1 in the question box for me. And then go across the top. The middle one there is number 2. Retelling the story is number 3. Main character is number 4. Comparing 2 stories is number 5. And developing the sequences of events, or being able to illustrate in a storyboard kind of way, is what the one that you would choose. So I want you to think about which one would you choose, and if you've got a moment, whack it in, go to the question box and just tell me which number it is that you would pick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Now for me, I'm really comfortable here just to let the music play, because one of the things that I find in workshops also is that people are really struggle with the idea of silence, and sometimes it's good just to give people a little bit of think time. So I've got Lindsay and Kim who've gone with number 2. I've got Daryl who's picked number 3, wants to retell the story. Looking for a couple of other people to tell me what their learning preference is. Because what I'm also doing here is I'm starting to find out more about the people in my class. starting to find out what their patterns are for the ways that they would like to learn, which is a really powerful thing for a leader of learning to do. I've got Suzanne, who likes number 3. I've got Maria, who's gone back to number 2 for us, so I can see a real theme emerging here. Amy, you're an outlier. You've gone to number 4. I kind of knew you would be, Amy. Well done. All right, so I've got a couple of, I've got Mavis has gone for number 2 here as well. So I've got multiple people who are picking in that 2 and 3 space. And I've got a couple of people going, you know what, that sounds great, but I'm going to pick something different myself. And the learning that they will do there is as valid as if I had been the one who controlled the learning and had controlled the activity that they would take on. What I want you to reflect on here for just a moment, as Freddie croons away in the background there, is what I want you to reflect on is, did you choose the easiest option? And I think most people, when they put this in here, would say, actually, no, I didn't. I chose the one where I think I could demonstrate the best of my learning. So the great part about providing choice is not that people tend to slack off on you. The great part about providing choice is that what happens is people step up and they look to engage at a much higher level in much more complex ways with the learning that you're hoping they will do, which is pretty exciting. I will let this one go now because it is a long song. It is a long song. Okay. Let me get my PowerPoint back on. All right, I really hope you've enjoyed today, and thank you so much to the people that have contributed as we've moved along today. A couple of things to finish off. One is that I have made available in the handout section here today the slide deck from today. So if you wanted to grab that one, even I guess just to even demonstrate the way that something like Bohemian Rhapsody can allow people to think about what the choices they are that you would provide in a learning environment, how that contributes to higher levels of engagement, then please jump in there and do that. We can work with you at Real Learners, and I personally can come out and work with you and your organisation around this as well. So we coach people on how to build these better learning environments, better learning cultures, better learning experiences, and better learning relationships for people. I was really rapt last week to present at the Vet Development Centre's conference and to deliver a keynote on higher order learning and learning through relationships that I just had a ball with them, and they're a room full of adult educators, and they really got what we were trying to talk about there. And we also have some long-term partnerships where we work with organisations across significant periods of time to make learning the underpinning, I guess, platform of their culture, which is pretty exciting work to do. If you would like us to work with you around that, just choose one of those words. If it's about workshops, keynotes, coaching, training, or partnerships, then pop one of those words in the question box, and I'll reach out to you personally after today, and see if that's something that that you'd like me to come and work with you around. See if we can add some benefit to what you're already doing. And then next month, we're going to run. I talk a lot about group work. And the truth is, when it comes to group work, like I said before, that groups of 8 or 10 tend to be a little too large because personality gets in the way. But at the same time, we've got this sense, I think, that that people really want to connect through the work that they do. So what I want to do is to run a workshop next month about how we can learn more effectively together. What are the risks? Because there are risks. We certainly, if you look at the picture there, I'm usually trying to choose a sunshine and rainbows kind of picture that kind of shows you how wonderful it can be. But I do think that that sometimes the whole idea of group work just makes people cringe and fight. So there are risks associated with working collaboratively and getting people to work together. There are also some wonderful rewards if you can do it right. So I really want you to make sure that you do your work around thinking about how you can get people together and how you can get them working collaboratively in a way that really drives impact after the learning experience. So I'm going to show you inside a model of collaborative or cooperative learning that I think can transform the way that you run workshops and the way that you lead learning in your business. Amy's got a question for me, which is, and if you do have a question while we're finishing up today, we've got a few minutes before we finish. Amy's asking me, are you ever going to run a public workshop? Yeah, it's on my mind, Amy. It's on my mind. One of the things that Chris and I talked about before today was that we had record registrations for our webinar today. So we feel like this might be the kind of topic that people are looking for a public workshop around. So yes, that one's on our mind. Amy will make sure that you know fully well about that as well. If there aren't any other questions, I'm just going to do one more check now of the question box and whether we've got any hands up as well in the room. I did see a hand before, but I think that might have been one of those accidental stretchy kind of hands that has been put down again. We'll leave it there, guys. Thank you so much for today. If you are looking to reach out and you just want to have a chat about the content or the concepts that sit behind today's webinar, then feel free to get in touch. Thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate your feedback too. And get in touch with me personally there or through Real Learners, through the Real Learners email address and the website. And we'll see you next month for a little bit of yarning about how we can learn collaboratively together. Okay, bye for now, guys. Bye-bye.